All right, welcome everybody to our week 11 lecture presentation. I hope you all had a wonderful spring break, and we are moving into the last leg of the semester. This week I want to talk about the annotated bibliography, which is our next essay. And this is a presentation that is inspired by the great Lynn Lampert's presentation on how to prepare an annotated bibliography. So let's go ahead and get started. So what is this thing called the annotated bibliography? Well, it starts off with a list of citations for books, articles, documents, videos, whatever it is that you want to use for your upcoming paper, which is in preparation for our final research paper at the end of the semester. So each citation is followed by a brief, usually 150 words, 1 or 2 paragraphs, a brief descriptive and evaluative paragraph, and this is the annotation. So we have our citations, and then it's followed by an annotation. And the purpose of the annotation is to inform the reader of the relevance, accuracy, and quality of the sources cited. Now, our upcoming paper, our final argumentative essay, requires 8 sources. And for our annotated bibliography, I'm requiring 5. So I think that this will be a great head start for your research paper, and then you'll only have to find 3 more sources to include in your essay. So I think this will be really helpful. And it's not a traditional essay, but you are going to utilize skills that you would have in writing an essay. So when creating an annotated bibliography, it calls for the application of intellectual skills such as concise exposition, succinct analysis, and informed library research. Now, you guys have already finished working on an analysis essay when you analyze the speech from TED Talks. So you have an idea that an analysis is more than just a summary of a work. It's really digging deeper and looking at the elements within the work to show if it's effective in terms of the last essay. And in this sense, we're looking at, is the source going to be applicable to your final research paper? So you're going to first locate and record citations, and this can be from books, periodicals, documents, videos, primary sources, secondary sources. Keep in mind that for the final essay, you have to have a variety of sources. So try not to just do internet sources or just do, whatever it may be. But you're looking at finding source material that is a variety of perspectives and variety of formats. Also keep in mind that the final essay does require you to have at least one source that applies to a misconception or the opposition of your argument. Then you're going to briefly examine and review the actual sources that you have. So you're going to choose those works that provide a variety of perspectives about your topic. So let's break down the actual annotation itself. So for each source, each of the 5 sources that you find, you are going to cite those sources. And if we look at the actual assignment description for the essay for annotated bibliography, if we look down at the rubric, and we're just going to look at the A section because we all want to get A's. Since there's 5 annotations here, and each one needs to clearly contain a summary of the material and a reflection of how that source might help you in the upcoming research paper. And each annotation needs to be 2 paragraphs long. And they need to have MLA citation. They need to have in-text citation when you summarize or paraphrase sources. And you're also going to include a title page with this assignment as well. So you should have access to this document through the week 10 assignments and quizzes folder. So once you have cited your source, you're going to follow it with a paragraph that is a concise summary of the central theme and scope of your source. So you're just summarizing the main points of the article. When we practiced summarizing way back with the first essay when we included a summary of another blog or another outside internet source in our blog post. So all these skills are just coming together, right? So we're going to have one paragraph that completely focuses on summarizing the source that you have. And you're going to include in-text citation when you summarize the source. It does not need to use quotes, and I actually discourage using quotes when you're trying to summarize a source because that becomes too specific. Instead, we're looking at summarizing the main ideas in the source that you're finding. And try to find, and the other thing is, like, for instance, if you are using a book, you may only use one chapter out of a full book. Well, then only cite that one chapter and only summarize that one chapter. I don't want you to summarize information that you're not going to ultimately use in your paper. And then you're going to include a second paragraph in your annotation that evaluates the reliability and usability of your source. So you're going to include an evaluation of the authority or background of the author. You could comment on the intended audience. You could compare and contrast this work with another that you have cited, or you could explain how this particular source illuminates your topic. So you're going to try to analyze whether or not this source is going to work well for your upcoming paper and how it's going to do so. In this paragraph, you also might discuss if it's covering a misconception or the opposition of your point of view. And really, when we look at sources, we want to be able to understand whether or not that source is reliable and if it's relatable. So those are the two things I want you to think about: reliable and relatable. So here are some questions that you could think about when you're determining whether or not the source is reliable and relatable. So one of the things you could look at is the author's credentials. What institution are they affiliated with? What degrees do they have? How are they experts in your particular topic or the field that they are covering in their article? And if they're just some Joe Schmo that doesn't really have any credentials, maybe that's not a reliable source. Other things to look at. Determine if you have seen that author cited in other sources. That can definitely be a tell on whether or not that author is someone appropriate to use for research. When was the source published? So this is something that's important to look at when we determine reliability. So you may find information that's relatable, that relates to your topic itself, but it may be out of date. So say you find a source that was published in the 70s, well, a lot of that information has probably changed. We've had a lot of time and development of technology and development of ideas and extra research in science and all that kind of stuff since the 70s. So a lot of that stuff is going to be out of date. So things that are so old that they no longer are applicable would be considered unreliable sources. So keep that in mind. So the date that it's published is also important. Now, of course, if it's like concepts and ideas, if it's a historical document, then that might be still appropriate. So you have to determine based on topic and content. Other things you can look at in terms of if it's out of date or not is if the work is a first edition or earlier edition and there are future editions. So, for instance, like our textbook is the 6th edition of academic writing. I would guarantee that this has changed from the first edition. Usually authors provide new editions of the same text because they have updated material to share. So the first edition of Sequence for Academic Writing may not have as much information about citing YouTube, for instance. So they're going to update information as they add new additions to a particular work. So when you're looking at trying to find things that are up to date, use the latest edition of a book. So these are all related to reliability. That includes looking at where it was published. If it's published by University Press, for instance, it's likely to be scholarly. Is it published in a popular magazine versus a scholarly journal? Is it aimed at a specialized or generalized audience? So that question actually works well in terms of looking if it is relatable to your topic. So for instance, if you are approaching a topic that is very specialized and you understand that particular topic in a specialized way, then you could probably approach that specialized audience. You could be part of that. But you may need information that is more generalized for the audience that you intend for your paper. So it's important to determine audience when you're looking at a source in order to determine if it's going to relate to your overall paper. And keep in mind, if you're writing science papers, you probably need a generalized audience, because I am not that great at science and I need things explained. So we all have our little things that we're not so great at, but that's definitely my biology in particular. Other things to determine if it's reliable. So does the author cite their own sources? So does it have a bibliography included in the source that you found? If not, that might be questionable. Is the information covered fact, opinion? Is it propaganda? And how would that fit in your research if it does? Is it reliable? And does it relate? Does the information appear to be valid and well researched, or is it questionable and unsupported? If it's questionable and unsupported, I suggest not using it, because I would think that it's not a reliable source. Are the ideas and arguments advanced more or less in line with other works that you've read? So that means, do they connect to other things that you've said? Do they back one another up? If you have one source that tends to go off the deep end and goes into a realm that other sources haven't gone, it may not be a reliable source. Perhaps it's not a well-founded source. Is it primary or secondary? Both of these are completely appropriate for academic research, but that can also help you determine the relatability of the topic. Locate critical reviews. This can also help you determine if the sources are reliable or not. Okay, so I wanted to share an example. So what I have here is an MLA citation from a source that I found at the Crowder Library, which you can access yourself. You go to crowder.edu and you can find a library link right there, and you have access to an online database of a lot of different sources. So I do suggest, when you're researching, check out the online library from Crowder, and you're going to find reliable sources through that particular method of finding sources. Now, here we have this article by Greg Forster and Christina D'Andrea, and it's titled "Free to Teach: What American Teachers Say About Teaching in Public and Private Schools, School Choice Issues in Depth." It's published by the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice in 2009, and I found it in the ERIC database through Crowder, and this just says that it's a web source and when I found it. So when you're citing your sources, one of the things to keep in mind if you find things at the Crowder Library is they actually provide citations for you. But I've also posted in the classroom, let me see if I can find that. Yeah, so I've posted in the classroom, this is the week 11 folder, and I've posted in the classroom this little table here that has links for research. Now, I don't include the Crowder Library because I assume that you know where that is. But if you do have questions on how to find the Crowder Library, just give me a call and I'll walk you through it. But we have different ways to find sources here, and they differ on reliability. But there's links of where you can go and kind of a description of each of the things that you can use. I do suggest trying to utilize more scholarly searches like Google Scholar. You can find things like U.S. government websites, the Internet Public Library, Library of Congress. So there's a lot of great sources out there online that you can find. So once you have cited the source that you're going to use for your annotation, then you're going to provide the annotation itself. So the first thing you should do is provide, a full paragraph. I say 5 or 6 sentences. It could be 4, it could be 12, whatever it is that you're going to need. You need to have a few sentences at the beginning in the first paragraph that actually describe the article. So what is the information in the article about? What does the author provide? What's the point of view? What's the school of thought? What kind of source is it? Is it a criticism? Is it a historical piece? Is it a biography? So just sharing what is in the source that you found. So it's one paragraph in the annotation. And then you're going to also include an analysis of the effectiveness of that source. So how is it going to be effective for your particular research paper? So this might be where you move into the sharing what you think about the reliability of the source. Because if it's not reliable, you shouldn't use it in your academic essay. So this could be explaining the qualifications of the author, showing how the main purpose of the source relates to your main purpose in your paper. You can share about any biases that you might detect, talk about the intended audience and how that might relate to your topic or the level of difficulty of the article, the relationship, if any other works in the area of study, so how does it relate to other things that you found. And basically the second paragraph of your annotation is going to share how this source will help you in your upcoming paper. Is it reliable? Is it relatable? So I have a complete example of this annotation for this particular source. And I start my annotation with my works cited page citation, and then I follow it with 2 paragraphs. So here are the 2 paragraphs. This study, conducted by Forster, DeAndrea, and the Choice Friedman Foundation for Education, shares findings concerning the differences between the perspectives of public and private school teachers. From the onset of the study, it shows to have a bias toward school choice. However, the authors clearly indicate this bias is based on the scientific process of the study's clear findings. Notice I have in-text citation there. Some of the differences found in favor of teaching in the private school include more job satisfaction, a safer atmosphere, more freedoms with book choice and curriculum development, and less overall stress in the workplace. Notice I have in-text citation there. The author states this study analyzes data from the 2003 and 4 Administration of Schools and Staffing Survey and National Survey conducted by the U.S. Department of Education. In-text citation. The information provided will ultimately prove the benefit teachers find in teaching at private schools. In my essay, I will argue that our current culture needs to shift the educational process into a more private school model process. This study will allow me to give the teachers' perspectives to the issue at hand. In conjunction with my other evidence, I will be able to better prove that our current public education system is lacking in several areas. So here we have our first paragraph that summarizes the source and shares its reliability. How is it reliable? What does it include? And I'm using citation in that as I summarize, and it generally just talks about the article itself. And then I have a second paragraph. It's not super long, but it's basically sharing how this particular source will work in my upcoming academic research paper. So how will I use it? And this would be a complete annotation for 1 out of the 5 sources that I would use in my essay 4. So remember, things to do for this week. Read page 249 to 264 in a sequence for academic writing. You can find library guides at this link that I have provided here for the Crowder Library. So if you want to know how to use the Crowder Library, check out that link. Also, be sure to respond to the Week 11 discussion board questions, where you're going to get started on finding some sources for your annotation. We are taking the combined quiz 2 and 3 this week, so keep a watch for that in the Week 11 folder. Should be there in the next day or two. And keep in mind that our Essay 4 Annotated Bibliography is due at the end of Week 12. So you're finding 5 sources and developing those annotations by the end of Week 12. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact me. And otherwise, we will see you in the discussion board, and have a great week.